I never understood how a person could feel both completely empty and painfully full at the same time, until those months when my mother was dying on the other side of the country, and all I could do was watch through a tiny, pixelated screen. It was a strange kind of torment, one where guilt settled into my bones like a second skeleton, rattling inside me no matter where I went or what I did. Every night I would FaceTime her from my tiny one-bedroom apartment, and she would smile at me with lips that were too pale and eyes that were too bright, like she was trying to hold sunlight inside her just a little longer. She'd insist she was okay even as her breath shook at the end of every sentence. She never said she was tired. She never said the pain was getting worse. She never said she was scared. She only ever said one thing: "Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I'm fine. You just work hard and come see me when you can." And I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was unbearable. The truth is, I didn't have the money. Not even close. Rent, overdue bills, groceries, and the never-ending carousel of shifts at the restaurant where I carried trays heavier than my own hope, it all crushed me. Flights were expensive, and every hour I wasn't working felt like I was stealing time away from the one person I loved most in the world. She tried to hide it from me, but I knew. I knew her treatments drained every penny she had, and when she offered again and again to pay for my flight, I felt sick. I couldn't take her money. Not when she needed it to stay alive. So I lied. I told her work wouldn't approve my vacation dates yet. I told her flights were fully booked. I told her I was fine, that I was eating well, sleeping well, coping well, every lie softer than the one before, shaped like comfort but forged out of desperation. And each time she nodded, each time she smiled, even through the ache creeping across her face, I felt a little piece of myself rot away. The night the doctor called, I was folding napkins in the storage room at the restaurant, surrounded by the smell of bleach and lemon cleaner. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. And then the world ended. "Are you the patient's daughter?" "Yes, I'm very sorry, but I don't know how much time she has left." "What do you mean?" "She hasn't told you, but she's begun coughing up blood. She refused to let us inform you earlier. She didn't want you to worry." I sank to the floor. The napkins spilled around me like torn canvas. My chest tightened. My throat closed. The doctor kept talking, but everything began to blur until his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You may want to come as soon as possible." As soon as possible. I didn't have money for as soon as possible. I barely had money for tomorrow. I ended the call, pulled my knees to my chest, and cried the kind of cry that feels like it could tear your ribs open from the inside. Nobody found me. No one came looking. The walls absorbed everything. When my shift ended, I walked home in the dark, the streetlights flickering above me like they were unsure whether to stay alive or not. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I stared at my cracked ceiling until morning, trying to figure out how to do the impossible, how to get across the country in time to say goodbye. The answer was simple. I couldn't. Not without some kind of miracle. But miracles are not the type of thing you expect when you're running on 3 hours of sleep and grief. The next day at work, my eyes were swollen, my head heavy. But I clocked in anyway. I always clocked in. My manager didn't notice. He rarely noticed anything unless it directly affected table turnover. I grabbed my apron, tied it around my waist, and forced myself into my customer service smile. Halfway through the lunch rush, when I was balancing 2 trays of orders, I saw him walk in. At first, I didn't believe it. Why would he be here? Why this restaurant? Why now? He wore a plain black baseball cap low over his eyes, sunglasses covering half his face, and scruff shading his jaw. He didn't look like he had arrived to be recognized. He looked like he wanted to melt into the background. But the moment he sat down, I knew Leonardo DiCaprio, the Leonardo DiCaprio, Titanic hero Leonardo DiCaprio, and not in glossy magazine form. Not on a giant movie poster right there, sitting in my section, breathing the same air, holding a menu like he wasn't one of the most famous faces in the world. My pulse spiked so hard I thought I might faint. He wasn't alone. A woman sat with him, older, gentle-looking, with warm eyes that scanned the menu far more carefully than he did. His mother, maybe? The resemblance was there if you looked closely. He kept his head down. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't look around. He didn't want attention. I swallowed, wiped my hands on my apron, and approached the table trying to act like I wasn't internally combusting. "Hi, welcome. Can I get you started with something to drink?" He didn't look at me long, just a small glance. Soft but alert. "Water's fine," he said, voice quiet. Like he was trying to lower the volume of his own existence. His mother ordered tea. I walked away, my hands shaking so intensely that I almost spilled the drinks twice. I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul? If one person knew, the entire restaurant would explode with chaos. Cameras would appear. Fans would crowd. Paparazzi might show up. And he didn't deserve that. Not today. Not while he was just trying to have a meal with his mother. But the whole time I served them, the appetizers, the entrees, the refills, I felt like I was vibrating. My mother was dying, and I was smiling for the sake of a movie star. My heart was breaking, and he was sitting quietly in front of me, thanking me politely each time I brought something to the table. It was surreal. Like two worlds collided at a strange angle, the glamorous one I'd always admired from afar, and the bleak one I was living in. By the time they finished eating, the emotional tension inside me felt like a balloon stretched too thin. I wanted to talk to him, but I didn't want to bother him. I wanted to say something meaningful, but I didn't want to break his anonymity. I wanted to thank him for the characters that kept me company on long nights when I had no one else, but I didn't want to seem like the crazy fan hovering in the shadows. So instead, I took the receipt and wrote a tiny note on the bottom. "Your movies are awesome. I hope you like the food." Short, respectful, quiet like a whisper on paper. I brought the check to the table, set it down gently, and walked away. A few minutes later, when they stood up to leave, he looked around just a little, searching. When his eyes found mine, he smiled. It was small, soft, real. Then they left. I exhaled, feeling like I had been holding my breath for an hour. When I went back to clean the table, I picked up the receipt and froze. Under my note, written in smooth handwriting, were the words, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover." And beside it, a tip, a $500 tip. I stared at the number for so long the ink felt like it was burning into my vision. $500. I thought it was a mistake. A misprint. Something he meant to change but forgot. My first instinct was to run outside and give it back. But when I pushed through the doors, he was already gone. The sunlight outside felt different. Too bright. Too sudden. Like the day had shifted into a new dimension. I walked back in, gripping the slip of paper like a lifeline, a $500 miracle. The exact miracle I had needed last night. The moment my shift ended, I ran home, pulling up flight schedules on my phone with shaking fingers. I bought the next possible ticket. My bank account cried, but I didn't care. I called my mom. She sounded tired. So tired. "Mom?" "Yes, baby. I'm coming." A pause. A soft sob. "You are?" "Yes, I'm coming tonight." And for the first time in months, she didn't pretend. She cried openly. When I arrived at the hospital, I ran through the halls like the ground was collapsing behind me. Nurses called out, but I didn't stop. I reached her room, breathless, trembling, terrified that I would be too late, but she was there, alive, barely, but alive, and I got to hold her hand for the last 20 minutes of her life. I got to hug her. I got to hear her voice one more time. I got to say goodbye because of a stranger who didn't want to be recognized, because of a man I pretended not to know, because he left $500 on the table. I gotta be there. I got to love her in person, not through a screen. I gotta have a final moment with the woman who gave me everything, and I never forgot that. Not ever. I thought losing my mother would break me all at once, like a glass dropped on the floor, one sharp shatter, one moment of impact, one clean line between before and after. But grief didn't hit me like that. It was slower, heavier, almost patient. It crept into my lungs and wrapped itself around my ribs, making every breath feel like it belonged to someone else. Even after I flew back home, even after I returned to work pretending life had some kind of rhythm left in it, everything inside me felt like it was suspended in a fog I couldn't name. For weeks, I moved in a kind of quiet blur. Customers came and went. Plates hit tables. Orders were shouted across the kitchen. My coworkers laughed at things I couldn't hear anymore, jokes I couldn't register. People hugged me with pity-softened arms, and every "I'm so sorry" felt like a reminder of something I was trying desperately not to drown in. My manager gave me a week off after I got back, but when I returned, nothing felt familiar anymore. The restaurant lights were too bright, the noise too loud. My uniform felt like a costume someone else had worn before me, but I needed the work. I needed the normalcy, even if it felt fake. Mostly, I needed something to fill the hours that were now hollow without her nightly FaceTime calls. I found myself reaching for my phone at 9 p.m. every evening, thumb hovering over her contact picture like habit hadn't yet learned she wasn't there anymore. One night, after a particularly long shift, I sat alone on my apartment floor with a cold container of leftover soup. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker Lydia. "You doing okay?" I stared at it for a long time before replying, "I don't know." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Sometimes silence is the only thing gentle enough for grief. I held the receipt from Leonardo DiCaprio in my hand, a ridiculous little piece of paper that had essentially turned into my life preserver. I had tucked it into a drawer with the care of someone storing a priceless artifact. I knew it was silly. I knew it didn't change anything. But every time I opened the drawer and saw his handwriting, saw those words, "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover," I felt a tiny stitch pulling together the frayed edges inside my chest. The world was cruel. But sometimes, unexpectedly, it was also kind. But grief has a strange way of making you believe you're alone even when you're not. I attended her funeral with relatives I hardly knew, returned home, and fell into days that blurred so seamlessly together I could barely separate one from the next. It was like the world had moved on without asking if I was ready to follow. Then something strange happened. It started with a letter, not a bill, not an advertisement, a real letter, handwritten, addressed to me. The envelope didn't have a return address. The handwriting was neat, almost too neat, like it belonged to someone who never rushed a day in their life. When I opened it, a folded piece of paper slid out. Inside was a short message. "I heard about your mother. You did something good for me once. I hope this helps you do something good for yourself." And tucked behind the note, 2 tickets. Round trip, open dated, domestic, anywhere in the country. My heart stuttered. Plane tickets weren't cheap. These were the kind business people used, flexible, non-restricted. The kind most normal people never touched because the price alone could fund a month's rent for a long time. I just stared at them, the paper soft between my fingers, my thoughts racing in 100 confused directions. Who would send something like this? Who even knew what happened? The funeral had been small. I hadn't posted about it anywhere. I hadn't told anyone except my coworkers. And definitely no one wealthy enough to buy plane tickets like they were stamps. Then I noticed a line at the bottom of the note, written in the same calm handwriting. "P.S. Consider it interest." Interest. The word hit me hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. There were only 2 possibilities. Either this was the universe playing some bizarre joke on me, or Leonardo DiCaprio somehow found out, but the logical part of my brain told me that didn't make sense. I hadn't told anyone at the restaurant about him until much later, and even then, it wasn't like anyone had access to my address, my grief, or my life. He wouldn't know my last name. He wouldn't know anything about my personal life. He had been there for one meal, that was it, and yet, the timing, the phrasing, the coincidence of it all. I put the tickets away with the receipt, closing the drawer slowly, almost afraid they'd disappear if I looked for them again. The next few weeks were quieter. Work settled into a rhythm again. And though grief still clung to me like a shadow that didn't know when to leave, I learned to live around it. Sometimes it felt manageable. Sometimes it felt heavy. Sometimes it crushed me without warning, and the restaurant got busy again. A new movie had come out that week. A new wave of tourists flooded the area. And with tourists came money I desperately needed if I was ever going to build a life that didn't feel like a tightrope over a canyon. One night, during the dinner rush, I was delivering plates to a loud table when my manager suddenly appeared beside me. Looking flustered but excited. "There's someone in your section requesting you," he said. "I'm still delivering. You need to go now." I frowned. I had never seen him look eager about anything that wasn't a 5-star Yelp review. I wiped my hands on my apron, slid the plates onto the table, and walked quickly toward the back corner booth. My steps slowed when I recognized the silhouette. Hat, sunglasses, the same subtle posture of someone used to hiding in plain sight. Leonardo DiCaprio. My heart thudded. Painfully, he wasn't with his mother this time. He sat alone, reading a menu he didn't seem to need. As I approached, he looked up just enough for me to know he knew exactly who I was. "Hi," I said softly, trying not to sound starstruck or unhinged. "Welcome back." He smiled, small, almost secretive. "I wasn't sure you'd recognize me." I almost laughed. "You're kind of recognizable." He chuckled under his breath, brushing the brim of his hat lower. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "For what?" He tilted his head. His eyes, even behind the sunglasses, felt sharp. "You treated me like a person, not an exhibit." I swallowed. "Anyone deserves that?" "Not anyone gives it," he said quietly. There was a pause, long between the moments, kind of pause. Then he added, "I'm sorry about your mom." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't told him. I hadn't told anyone who would have told him. "How? Did you know?" He didn't answer immediately. He glanced at the table, then back up at me, his expression softening. "People think actors don't pay attention. But we do. We listen." He hesitated. "I overheard you talking to your manager the last time I was here. You looked wrecked." I didn't want to intrude. My chest tightened. I remembered that day, the exhaustion, the fear, the desperation. I had been a walking bruise. "I'm sorry," he said, "for your loss." Something about the sincerity in his voice made my eyes sting. I blinked quickly, but he noticed anyway. He lowered his sunglasses slightly, meeting my gaze fully for the first time. "And for what it's worth," he said softly, "you did the right thing. She knew you loved her." My throat closed. For months, I'd been drowning in guilt. Hearing someone say that, someone who didn't owe me anything, someone who might have understood loss in his own way, felt like a hand reaching into my chest and loosening something I'd held too tightly. I nodded, unable to speak. He didn't push. He didn't pry. He just picked up the menu and asked, "What do you recommend today?" I managed a shaky laugh. "The pasta's good." For the next hour, I served him the same way I had before, quietly, respectfully, pretending for his sake that he was just another person who walked into the restaurant for a meal. But this time, something was different this time. We weren't strangers. When he finished his dinner and I dropped off the check, he didn't write a long message. No note, no elaborate gesture. He simply added another enormous tip and one line at the bottom of the receipt. "Stay brave." 2 words, but they hit harder than anything I'd been told in months. He left as quietly as he came, slipping out the side door like a shadow, and once again, my life shifted, quietly, gently, but unmistakably, because of him. For several days after Leonardo's second visit, my body carried a strange kind of electricity, quiet, humming, impossible to explain. Not excitement exactly, not shock, not even disbelief. Something softer, something warmer. Something like standing near a window with sunlight warming the floorboards. Not touching you directly, but touching everything around you. I kept replaying that moment when he'd pushed his sunglasses down just enough for our eyes to meet. There had been something raw, there something human, something unpolished, like a truth he didn't show the rest of the world. It didn't matter that he was famous. It didn't matter that his face lived on billboards and posters and magazine spreads. What I saw in that moment was a man who had lived through loss too. A man who recognized something breaking, quietly inside me. And that's what stayed with me long after he left. Life, however, didn't suddenly transform because he'd shown up. There was no magical wave that removed my grief or paid my bills or fixed the hollow ache in my chest. The next morning, I still woke up to the same apartment, the same undone laundry, the same half-empty fridge, the same quiet that never felt quite like silence, but something small had changed. A spark, a warmth, a reminder that I wasn't entirely invisible in the world. Even my manager noticed. "You look different," he said as I tied my apron. "Different how?" "I don't know." "Less dead inside?" I snorted. "Thanks." Very poetic, but I knew what he meant. Still, I didn't expect Leonardo to come back again. Twice was more than enough to qualify as unbelievable. 3 times would just be insanity. He was a man with a schedule, with obligations, with people constantly watching him. There was no logical reason for him to keep returning to the same ordinary restaurant in the same ordinary corner of the city. So, when he didn't show up again for a week, then 2, then 3. It didn't surprise me. The universe had allowed me 2 brief collisions with him. That was a gift in itself. Anything beyond that would cross into the kind of fantasy no real life could sustain. I kept the receipt, though, and the plane tickets. They stayed tucked in my drawer like secrets the world had accidentally allowed me to hold. Then something strange started happening again, but this time, it wasn't him. It was me. More customers began asking for my section. Regulars I'd never spoken to before. Couples, solo diners, families. They'd smile at me in a way that felt almost knowing, one older woman said. "You have a good aura, sweetheart?" I laughed awkwardly and thanked her. But when I told Lydia later, she raised an eyebrow. "She's right," Lydia said, shrugging. "You've been lighter lately." "Lighter?" "Really?" She nodded. "You were walking around in a thundercloud for months. Now you're like a rainstorm that's thinking about retiring." I rolled my eyes at her metaphor but smiled anyway. But the truth was, she wasn't wrong. Grief was still there. It still sat heavy on my chest in the mornings and still made my nights quieter than they should have been. But instead of crushing me, it had spread out in a way that felt bearable, manageable, like I could breathe through it if I just kept going. And part of me wondered, though, I never said it aloud, if that shift had begun in a dark corner booth with a man hiding behind sunglasses on a windy afternoon. About 3 weeks after his last visit, I finished my shift early and stepped outside. The sun was still out, painting the sidewalks gold. I took the long way home, walking slowly past the small bookstore on the corner, the noisy fruit vendor, the florist who always looked like she was fighting with her own bouquets. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it until I noticed the preview. "You free today?" My stomach tightened. I opened the message. "It's Leo." I stopped walking, right there on the sidewalk, surrounded by honking cars and people rushing past me. I froze with my phone in hand and my breath held hostage in my chest. Then another message came. "If you're not busy, I could use some air. Thought maybe you could join me for a walk." A walk. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. Why me? Why now? How did he get my number? Did the restaurant give it to him? Did he ask someone? Did he guess? Did he another message? If it's weird, ignore this. It wasn't weird. It was overwhelming, unexpected, almost unreal. But weird? No. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "I'm free." The response came quickly. "Meet me at the park near the lake?" I looked up at the street sign. I was 3 blocks away. "I'm on my way." I sent back. My heart was racing so fast it felt like something urgent was trying to break out of my chest. I started walking fast, then faster, then almost running, trying not to let the reality of what I was doing catch up to me. The park came into view, the lake glinting in the late afternoon sun. People hovered around benches, joggers passed by, kids shouted near the swings, and then I saw him, wearing the same hat, the same sunglasses, sitting on a bench beneath a tree like he'd been waiting longer than he'd admit. When he spotted me, He stood, his expression shifted calm, relieved, a little uncertain, like he hadn't been sure I would come. "You made it," he said quietly. "You texted," I replied. My breath catching even though I tried to sound normal, he gave a small laugh. "I did." There was something nervous in his smile, something almost shy. It disarmed me more than all his movies combined. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead. A dog barked in the distance. People laughed somewhere behind us. Then he finally said, "Walk with me?" I nodded. We fell into step together, silent at first, then slowly easing into conversation. Not about fame, not about movies, not about anything glamorous. Just life. He asked about my job. I asked about traveling. He asked what I did to clear my head. I asked how he stayed sane with cameras in his face all the time, and somewhere along that path, something shifted again, not dramatically, not loudly, but unmistakably I realized he wasn't trying to impress me. He wasn't trying to be Leonardo DiCaprio. He was just being a person who seemed tired of being seen but never understood, a person who needed a moment of normal just as much as I did. At one point, he stopped walking, turned to face me fully, and said something so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "You're the only person in months who's talked to me like a human being." I swallowed hard. "I didn't know how else to talk to you." "That's the point," he murmured. For a second, for one fragile, precarious second, the world felt suspended around us. The air, the light, the sound of water splashing against the lake edge. Then he exhaled and looked toward the horizon. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said honestly, "but being here with you feels peaceful." Peaceful. My chest tightened because he was right. It did, and that terrified me more than anything. Peaceful. That was the word he chose, and it lingered in the air between us like it didn't quite know where to settle. I wasn't used to someone like him, someone whose face had been projected across oceans and cities, telling me something so grounded, so vulnerable. Part of me wanted to ask him what exactly he found peaceful. My presence, the quiet of the park, the anonymity the first offered him. But another part of me was afraid of the answer. Because if he said something I wasn't ready to hear, or didn't say something I hoped he felt, I knew it would leave a mark I couldn't easily ignore. So instead of answering his confession directly, I took a slow breath and walked a few steps ahead, giving him enough space to step beside me again. He did, falling naturally into my rhythm, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way I imagined they rarely were. "Do you come here often?" he asked, and his tone almost made me laugh. It was such a classic line, so ordinary, so human. "Sometimes," I said. "When I need to breathe. When I need to remember that the world keeps moving, whether I can keep up or not." He glanced sideways at me. "You talk like someone who's lived more life than most people twice your age." I shrugged. "You lose enough, you grow up fast." The quiet that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, almost heavy, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "I lost my grandmother before Titanic came out," he eventually said. "She was the only person in the family who didn't care about any of this." He motioned vaguely, meaning fame, success, the spotlight that never fully left him. "She used to make me promise I'd stay grounded, that I'd stay real. And have you?" I asked softly. He paused, shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, then sighed. "I try. But sometimes I look in the mirror and I'm not sure which version of me I'm looking at." That hit deeper than I expected. Because I knew what it felt like to lose yourself, not because of cameras or fame, but because life kept taking things from you faster than you could replace them. I thought about my ma, how quickly she'd faded, how helpless I'd felt watching it from thousands of miles away. I wondered if I'd even be recognizable to her now. We walked along the edge of the lake as the wind picked up. A few leaves drifted across the water like tiny boats being pulled along by the current. I found myself staring at the ripples, the way the sun fractured into pieces on the surface, the way everything moved even when nothing seemed to. He broke the silence with a voice deeper than before. "You never told me what happened with your mom." My breath caught. I hadn't expected him to bring her up. I hadn't expected him to remember details from a conversation we barely had. I hadn't expected him to ask either, not because he was cold or uncaring, but because most people didn't ask about grief unless they were prepared to hold part of it. I stopped walking. He stopped too. She died, I said quietly. The day I flew out? His expression shifted, softening, tightening, something complicated washing over him. I'm sorry. I nodded, staring at the ground. She waited for me, I added, voice cracking a little despite my attempt to keep it steady. Her doctor said he didn't understand how she'd held on that long. But I know she wanted to say goodbye. He didn't speak. He didn't rush to comfort me with cheap platitudes or empty reassurances. He didn't say she was in a better place or that time heals everything. He just stood there, present, listening, letting me talk at my own pace. That day in the hospital, I continued, I realized how unfair life can be, how quickly it can change, how fast everything you love can disappear. A breeze brushed past us, scattering a few leaves at our feet, so I started working more, I said. Not because I needed the money, though I did, but because I needed something to fill the space where she used to be. He nodded slowly. Grief makes you restless. You think if you keep moving, you won't feel it. Exactly. But it catches up anyway, he murmured. It does. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at the lake, breathing the same heavy air. Then he turned to face me fully. You know, the day I came into the restaurant, I wasn't having a good day. He swallowed. People assume I always am. But that day I felt like I was suffocating. I just wanted a quiet meal somewhere no one would bother me. And then you showed up, calm, kind, normal. He gave a soft laugh. It was like a breath of fresh air. My heart tightened, not in a romantic way, but in an emotional, unexpected, deeply human way. You didn't treat me like a spectacle, he said. And when you wrote that note, it felt, I don't know, pure, genuine, something I hadn't seen in a long time. His voice lowered. That's why I left the tip. Not out of pity. Not out of fame. Because you were real. The world felt suddenly smaller, quieter, like the sounds of the park had lowered their volume just for us. I never thought I'd see you again. I whispered. I didn't either, he admitted. But then something about that day stayed with me. Something about you stayed with me? My heart stumbled. He looked down, then back up at me, his sunglasses reflecting the trees behind me. You don't have to be anyone with me? Not perfect. Not cheerful. Not strong. You can just be you. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. How much energy I'd spent holding myself together around everyone else. How exhausting it had been pretending I wasn't slowly unraveling inside. My throat tightened. Thank you. He shook his head gently. No, thank you. We started walking again, slower this time. The sun drifted lower, casting long shadows across the path. The conversations became softer, deeper, more personal. We talked about things neither of us had planned to share: childhood memories, regrets, dreams we'd abandoned too soon, fears we didn't admit to anyone else. It felt strangely like we were building something fragile, something unspoken but real. By the time we reached the far end of the park, he stopped walking again. I should let you go, he said reluctantly. But can we do this again? My breath hitched. He wasn't asking casually. He wasn't asking the way a celebrity might when they were just being polite. He was asking like someone who meant it. Someone who needed it. Yeah, I said softly. We can. He smiled, really smiled, and the world seemed to tilt a little. Good, he murmured. He hesitated, like there was more he wanted to say, something he wasn't ready to voice yet. Then he gently squeezed my shoulder, a touch so light it felt almost like a question. Take care of yourself, he said. You too. And then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing under the fading sunlight, with my heart thundering in my chest and the strange certainty that my life had quietly shifted again, this time in a direction I didn't fully understand, but I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the last time we would meet. I didn't sleep much the night after we parted ways. Not because something dramatic happened or because my mind was spiraling in grief like it used to, But because for the first time in a long time, something felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but shifted. Like someone had opened a small window inside my chest and fresh air was finally finding its way in after years of stale, trapped quiet. I lay in bed replaying everything he said, every expression, every moment he hesitated, every time he looked like he was debating whether to speak or stay silent. I kept wondering why he'd opened up to me at all, why he'd let himself be so human in front of a stranger. The version of him I'd met at the restaurant months ago, tired, hiding, guarded, was still there somewhere, but now I'd seen something beneath that. Something vulnerable and fragile he probably didn't show anyone unless he trusted them, and what scared me most was how natural it had felt for me. To let him see pieces of me too the next morning? I found myself checking my phone for messages even though he didn't have my number and I didn't have his. It was stupid, I knew that. People like him didn't chase after people like me. Not in real life. Not in any world I'd grown up in. But the park felt like something outside of reality. A space where the rules didn't apply and two very different lives had. Somehow intersected long enough to feel familiar. I kept going to work like normal. Taking orders, balancing plates, sweeping floors. Pretending that nothing extraordinary had happened. But my coworkers noticed I was acting different. A few of them asked if I was feeling all right, if I'd gotten more sleep, if I had good news, or if something was wrong. I just shrugged and said life was weird lately because that was the only explanation that didn't sound insane. Days passed. Then a week. Then almost 2. By then, I had convinced myself that maybe I had imagined the look in his eyes. Maybe the moment had meant more to me than it had to him. Maybe he had simply been lonely that day and I just happened to be there. Maybe he was used to making connections that didn't last. Connections he forgot as soon as he walked away. It wasn't that I thought he was cruel. It was that I knew how people like him lived, constantly moving, constantly surrounded, constantly pulled into 100 different directions. And I was just one quiet afternoon in the middle of a busy life. A soft moment he'd forget when the noise returned. At least that's what I told myself, so I wouldn't hope too much, but then something strange began to happen. He started showing up. Not in obvious ways, no. Swarms of fans, no entourage, no flash of cameras. Just small glimpses. A silhouette across the cafe window when I looked outside, gone by the time I blinked. A familiar voice ordering coffee behind me at a shop down the street while I stood in line waiting for my break drink. A figure wearing a hat and sunglasses sitting on a bench near the corner of the park. One afternoon when I took the long way home. At first, I thought I was imagining him everywhere because he had gotten stuck in my head like some kind of unresolved sentence. But one afternoon, during a slow shift when I stepped outside to take the trash out, I saw him across the street. He was leaning against a brick wall, pretending to be absorbed in his phone, but his posture gave him away. He was watching the restaurant. Or maybe watching from me. I froze. His head lifted slightly, just enough to lock eyes with me across the street. And that was when I really knew that it wasn't coincidence. He wasn't stalking me. He wasn't being creepy. He was simply there. Showing up in small, careful ways as if trying to see whether I wanted him in my world or whether he was intruding. The moment he saw me understand, he pushed off the wall and crossed the street. His walk was easy, casual, but his eyes stayed on me the entire time, checking my reaction, making sure I wasn't uncomfortable. You really like this alley, huh? He teased gently, nodding toward the stack of trash bags behind me like he was trying to break the tension. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in me for 2 weeks. This is glamorous living, I said. You wouldn't understand? He laughed softly, that low, barely, their laugh that made the world feel smaller again. Then he stood in front of me, hands in his pockets, close enough that I could see the faint stubble along his jaw despite the disguise. I didn't want to bother you, he said quietly, but I wanted to see you again. My heart skipped once, maybe twice. I wasn't sure anymore. You could have just walked in, I said. He shook his head. I didn't want people staring at you, or whispering, or making it weird for you. That hit harder than I expected. Most people only considered how fame affected the celebrity, not the people around them. The fact that he had thought about how it would affect me, that weight showed on his face. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, it wasn't romantic. It was simply thoughtful, careful, human. "So what are you doing here?" I asked. He shifted slightly, rubbing the back of his neck like he was nervous. "I was hoping maybe we could talk again." He paused. "If you want to, I do." The relief that flashed across his face was so genuine it almost hurt. We walked together down the side street until we reached a small, quiet coffee place tucked between two old bookstores. It wasn't a place celebrities went. It wasn't a place tourists found. It was the kind of quiet corner most people walked past without ever noticing. Inside, the lights were warm and soft. The air smelled like cinnamon and dark roast, and the seats were mismatched but comfortable. He picked a booth at the back, away from the windows, and slid into the seat like he'd been there 100 times. I sat across from him, and for a moment we just stared at each other, not awkwardly, but with that same odd sense of familiarity that didn't make sense. "How have you been?" he asked softly. I hesitated. I didn't want to lie. Not to him. "Better," I said. "Not healed. Just better." He nodded. "Sometimes that's all you can be." He looked tired, not physically but emotionally, like he had been carrying something heavy on his shoulders for weeks. So I asked him what was wrong, because it felt like the right thing to do. He held my gaze for a long moment before answering. "I'm tired of being around people who only see the version of me they want," he said. "Not the version I actually am. That sounds lonely. It is." Silence settled between us again, but not a bad silence. A vulnerable, unguarded one. The kind that happens when two people are slowly learning each other's hurts. He took a sip of his coffee, then set the cup down. "You make it easier," he said. "Make what easier?" "Existing." The word hung there, delicate and heavy at once. I didn't know how to respond. I just looked at him, because sometimes silence said more than words ever could. We talked for hours after that. About work, about grief, about pressure, about the strange isolation that comes from losing someone who anchored you. He told me about his grandmother, how she used to tell him stories so he wouldn't get swallowed by the chaos. I told him about my mom, how she used to fall asleep to the sound of rain, and how she always said the world was kinder than it looked. He listened to every word like nothing else existed, like I wasn't just another person passing through his day, but someone whose voice he genuinely wanted to hear. When the sky outside turned pink and the lights inside the cafe grew warmer, he leaned forward slightly. "Can I see you again?" he asked. My breath caught for the second time that day. "Yes," I said. "You can." His shoulders relaxed, and he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the moment he walked across that street. "Good," he murmured, "because I don't think I'm done talking to you." I smiled softly. "I don't think I'm done either." Something shifted then. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just a slow, quiet understanding that our lives had begun to intertwine in a way neither of us had expected, but both of us somehow needed. When we finally left the cafe, he walked me to the corner of the street, keeping just close enough that I could feel his presence, but not so close that he invaded my space. The evening light glowed against his face, softening the hard lines, making him look almost like the version of himself from before the cameras. We stopped at the crosswalk. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. I nodded. "Same time." And when he walked away this time, I didn't feel like the world was drifting out of my hands. For the first time in a long time, it felt like something good was beginning. Didn't know when it started feeling normal meeting him in quiet corners of the city, slipping into cafes that barely had working Wi-Fi, walking through empty parks before the sun had fully risen, sometimes talking nonstop and sometimes not talking at all. There was no official arrangement, no labels, no promises, just two people who kept showing up for each other again and again until it became something neither of us wanted to admit we relied on, something that felt like a routine carved out of a world that otherwise didn't make space for people like us to meet in the first place. It was strange waking up and not feeling dread first thing in the morning. For months after my mother died, every sunrise felt like punishment, a reminder that life kept going without her. But now the mornings felt different, softer, like the air wasn't as heavy. Like the world wasn't pressing down on my lungs every time I opened my eyes. I'd lie there in bed thinking about the way he listened to me, really listened, without trying to fix me or tell me how to grieve, without asking me to be anything other than whatever version of myself I was that day. Some days I was quiet. Some days I was angry. Some days I laughed too hard at things that weren't even funny. And he adapted to all of it with an ease I didn't understand. It was like he knew what it felt like to be unsteady, to be lost, to be tired of pretending. We met again the next afternoon. Just like we'd agreed, though neither of us had actually said the words out loud. I walked into the little cafe first. The one with the mismatched chairs and the chalkboard menu that was smudged beyond recognition. He was already there, tucked into the corner booth. His baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses resting on the table next to his drink, like he had surrendered to the fact that no one in this place cared enough to look twice at him. When he saw me, something like relief flickered across his face, a subtle shift in his shoulders that told me he'd been waiting longer than he wanted to admit. I slid into the seat across from him, and for a few seconds we didn't speak. We just looked at each other in that quiet way we always did, like checking in, like making sure the other person was okay before anything else happened. "You look tired," he finally said. I exhaled, letting my body sink into the booth. "Long night. Thinking?" he asked. "Always." He nodded once, taking a sip from his mug before placing it down again with that careful gentleness he always had, as if he was afraid of breaking something invisible. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet," I said, shaking my head. "Maybe later. Then we'll talk about something else," he said, simple and steady. And just like that, the pressure dissolved. We didn't need small talk, didn't need filler words, didn't need to pretend our lives were neat and organized. He asked me what it was like growing up where I did, and I told him about the little streets running between old brick apartments, the corner store where the owner used to slip me free candies if I promised not to tell my mom, the way summers always smelled like melting asphalt and cheap sunscreen. He asked about my mom too, but gently, waiting for me to bring her into the conversation rather than forcing her into it. I told him about her cooking, about her habit of singing off-key when she cleaned, about the way she'd always say I was stronger than I thought even when I didn't feel like it. I told him about the flights I couldn't afford, about the nights staring at my phone hoping she'd call even though I knew she was too weak, about the final 20 minutes I got with her because of him. He looked down when I said that part, like the weight of it was something he wasn't sure he deserved to hold. "You don't owe me anything," he murmured. "I know," I said, "but I still needed to tell you." When he lifted his eyes again, something in them had changed, softened, or deepened. I couldn't tell. But he wasn't deflecting anymore. He wasn't hiding behind humility or discomfort. He was just present. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me be part of that story." Nearby, a couple laughed loudly over a shared pastry, completely oblivious to the strange, delicate moment unfolding just a few feet away. Outside, a bus rumbled past, shaking the window. Life moved on, messy and unbothered, but inside that tiny cafe, time had slowed down just enough for us to breathe. After an hour, we left. Not because we wanted to, but because the space had grown crowded and he hated the feeling of eyes lingering too long, even if most people didn't recognize him right away. We walked through the side streets, drifting without purpose, letting the city guide us the way it often did, through narrow alleys filled with laundry lines and fire escapes, past murals half-faded from weather, past street musicians, past people yelling at no one in particular, past pockets of life that didn't care who either of us were. At one point, he stopped at a small table of books outside a thrift shop, picking up a worn-out copy of something classic, the kind of novel that had been printed 1,000 times and still looked beautiful even when the spine was cracked. He flipped it open, ran his thumb along the edge of the page, and smiled, really smiled, the kind that touched his eyes. "She used to read this to me," he said. "My grandmother. Do you still read it? I asked. Sometimes. When I miss her. His voice was so soft it almost dissolved. He put the book back carefully, lining it up with the others like it mattered, then shoved his hands into his jacket pockets as if trying to hide whatever emotion had slipped through. It's strange, he continued, how grief comes in waves. Sometimes it feels manageable. Other times. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I know, I said. It hits out of nowhere, exactly. We kept walking after that, closer now, not quite touching but moving in sync. It was the kind of closeness that wasn't romantic yet, but held the potential for something deeper. Something neither of us was ready for, but both of us felt humming quietly beneath the surface dot at a certain point. He stopped again and looked at me, really looked. The way someone does when they're trying to figure out what to say next, but know the words matter. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Anything. Do I make you nervous? I blinked, unsure how to respond. Sometimes, I admitted, but not for the reasons you think. He tilted his head slightly. Then for what reasons? I took a small breath. Because you're not what I expected. And because you're starting to feel... I hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't scare either of us. Important. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't joke his way out of it. He just let the words settle, let the meaning pass between us like an invisible thread pulling us closer. And then, quietly, he responded, You're important too. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just stood there, feeling the ground steady beneath me in a way it hadn't in a long time. We walked again, slower now, our steps quieter, as if speaking too loudly or moving too fast might break whatever fragile understanding had formed. Eventually we reached the park, the same one from before, though the light was different now, warmer, brushing everything in amber like the world had softened along with us. We sat on the same bench where we talked the first time, and for a while we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything we'd said, everything we hadn't, everything hanging delicately between us. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the breeze move through his hair, letting himself exist without the tension he usually carried in his shoulders. And I watched him, not as a celebrity, not as someone untouchable, but as someone human, someone who laughed softly, someone who loved deeply, someone who was grieving just as fiercely as I was. After a long moment, he cracked one eye open and said, I like being here with you. I swallowed. I like it too. It feels easy, he said. Natural. Yeah, I whispered. It does. He looked at me again, and something in his expression shifted slightly, like he was trying to decide whether to cross a line he wasn't sure existed. And just when I thought he might say something that would tilt our entire world, he shook his head lightly and looked away, choosing not to push the moment further. Let's take a walk, he said instead. And we did. We walked until the sun dipped low and the air grew cooler. We walked until the city lights began flickering on, one by one. We walked until our steps felt synchronized, until our breaths matched the same rhythm. And then, when we finally reached the edge of the park and the night settled fully around us, we stopped. Not because the moment was over, but because it was shifting into something else, something slower, something deeper, something we weren't ready to name. He turned to me, his voice softer than the dark. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, I said. And when he walked away, I realized something I hadn't let myself think before. I was falling, not in the dramatic, reckless way movies showed. Not in a sudden rush, but in a quiet, steady way, like stepping into warm water, inch by inch, before realizing you were fully submerged. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if he felt the same. I didn't know if our worlds could ever fully overlap without breaking something. But I knew one thing with unsettling certainty. I wanted more. And that was enough to pull me back to that park, to that cafe, to him, again and again. The next morning I woke up with a strange, soft ache in my chest, the kind that wasn't painful but wasn't comfortable either, like emotional growing pains. I lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling and replaying every detail of the day before, every expression he'd made, every soft pause in his voice. Every moment when the air shifted between us and neither of us dared acknowledge it. My phone buzzed near my pillow, the vibration startling me out of my thoughts. For a split second, my heart jumped in a way I tried not to think about, but when I reached for the phone, my hands were unsteady enough to betray me. His name didn't appear, of course not his real name. I wasn't a saved contact in his phone, and he wasn't one in mine. What showed up instead was the simple, vague alias he'd used when we exchanged numbers for practical reasons the week before, just one letter. It felt both too small and too big at the same time. The message was short. Same spot. Usual time? That was it. No emojis, no unnecessary words. The simplicity of it was what made my stomach drop. It meant he assumed I'd show up. It meant yesterday wasn't a coincidence. It meant he wanted this, whatever this was, to continue. I typed back a simple yes, then stared at the 3 letters on the screen more times than I should have, as if they held some hidden meaning. By the time I was ready and stepping outside, the world looked different. Not dramatically, just subtly clearer, like the sharpness on reality had been quietly increased. Colors looked richer. The breeze felt gentler. Even the usual noise of the city seemed more melodic, less hostile. It terrified me how much of that shift was because of one person. But I went anyway. He was already sitting on the bench by the pond when I arrived. For once, he wasn't wearing sunglasses or a hat, which immediately made my breath catch. His hair was pushed back slightly and he looked exposed almost. Not vulnerable, just open, like he'd decided he wanted to be seen today. But only by me. When he lifted his head at the sound of my footsteps, he smiled soft, effortless, and so genuinely human that I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "Hey," he said. The simplest word in the world, yet it hit me like a whisper from someone I had known for years instead of weeks. "Hey," I echoed, sitting beside him. "You're early today." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. Too loud in my head. I nodded. "I know the feeling." "Yeah," he said quietly. "I figured you would." For a moment we didn't speak. A family nearby was feeding ducks, a child squealing with joy every time a bird came too close. A couple jogged past, laughing breathlessly. The world went on, full of tiny stories, but none of them seemed to reach our bench. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely together. "I was thinking about you," he said suddenly. My heart paused mid-beat. "Why?" he exhaled slowly. "Because yesterday felt different." I didn't trust my voice, so I stayed quiet. "I don't get that often," he continued. "People usually want something. Oh, they pretend not to want something, which is worse." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated with himself. "With you, it's not like that. You don't look at me like I'm some—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. Something. You look at me like I'm just a person?" And I didn't realize how much I missed that. My throat tightened in a way I didn't expect. "You are just a person," I said softly. "That's what I see." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't sadness, either, more like relief mixed with disbelief. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," I said. "People just make it complicated." He glanced sideways at me, eyes warm. "You talk like someone who's lived 10 lives. Feels like it sometimes?" The quiet between us stretched, comfortable enough that I didn't feel the need to fill it. But he did. "I want to show you something," he said, standing. "Come on." I followed him through the park, down a winding path lined with tall trees that filtered the sunlight into scattered, moving patterns on the ground. We walked farther than we usually did, crossing a pedestrian bridge and weaving through a more secluded area where the city felt distant. Finally, he stopped near an old greenhouse, one I didn't even know the park had. It looked abandoned from the outside, glass fogged and cracked, vines creeping along the frame. "Is this allowed?" I whispered. He smirked. "Only if we don't get caught." He pushed open the creaky side door, and I followed him inside. The air was warm and humid, heavy with the scent of soil and something sweet I couldn't identify. Light poured in through the broken glass in soft beams, illuminating dust particles that floated lazily in the air. He walked ahead, navigating the narrow paths between potted plants and overgrown vines like he'd been there before. "I found this place years ago," he said, "before everything got big. You come here often?" "Only when I want to disappear." He turned, meeting my eyes. "I wanted you to see it." That admission was small but monumental. It meant something. I didn't know exactly what, but I felt it. The greenhouse swallowed sound in a strange, calming way. It felt like the world outside didn't exist, like this was a pocket of time carved out just for us. He stopped near the center, where a faint ray of sunlight highlighted a cluster of blooming wildflowers forcing their way through cracked tiles. "They're stubborn," he said. "They grow even when nothing helps them." I crouched down, touching one of the petals. "Beautiful things usually are." He watched me for a long moment, and when I looked up, the expression on his face made my breath catch. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't affection. It was recognition. Like he saw something in me he didn't expect. "I like talking to you," he said quietly. "More than I should. Why, more than you should?" "Because this closeness, it's complicated." "Things don't have to be complicated," I said. "They are for me." He stepped back slightly, running a hand across the edge of an overturned pot. "People follow me, watch me, study me. They build stories about me, and then I start believing those stories instead of who I really am." He shook his head. "The more famous I got, the less real I felt." I moved closer, standing in front of him. "You seem real to me?" He looked up, his eyes full of something raw. "That's the problem," he whispered. The air thickened between us. For the first time, I noticed how close we were, how his breath brushed against my skin, how his gaze flickered between my eyes and my mouth, how he looked like someone fighting an impulse he wasn't ready to name. And then, almost too quietly to hear, he said, "You make it easy to forget who I'm supposed to be." His voice cracked on the last word, and before I could respond, he took a step back, breaking the spell. I let him because I understood. He needed space to breathe, to think, to not cross a line he wasn't ready for. He turned away, inhaling deeply, grounding himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to make it weird." "You didn't," I said softly. "None of this is weird." He shook his head again, not believing me but wanting to. "We should get out of here before someone sees us." We left the greenhouse without speaking, the sunlight feeling too bright after the soft shadows inside. As we walked back toward the busier side of the park, he slowed down and finally said, "Can we take it slow?" "We already are," I replied. "Good," he murmured. "Because I don't want this to break." "What is this?" I asked carefully. He looked at me, a tired but honest smile pulling at his mouth. "Something I'm not ready to lose." By the time we reached the main path again, the tension had softened. But the moment in the greenhouse still lingered between us, unspoken, fragile, undeniable. When he finally stopped at the gate where we usually parted ways, he hesitated. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said again, but when he walked away this time, I realized something new, something bigger, something terrifying. He wasn't just becoming important to me. I was becoming important to him, and that changed everything. The next day, I woke up with a strange, nervous clarity, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath with you. I didn't know why today felt different, only that it did. Maybe it was because of the greenhouse. Maybe it was the way he'd said something I'm not ready to lose. Or maybe it was the quiet fear building inside me that anything this rare, anything this unexpectedly beautiful, was now at risk of being broken simply because of how much it mattered. I got ready more slowly than usual, each movement deliberate, as if rushing would somehow disrupt the fragile balance we'd found. When I stepped outside, the air was cooler, the sky soft with a blanket of early clouds, the light muted in a way that made the world feel gentler. But underneath that gentleness was an unease I couldn't name. I arrived at the park early. So early that none of the usual dog walkers or joggers were around yet. For a moment, I wondered if he was already there, waiting. But the bench we always met at was empty, dew still clinging to its wooden slats. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. Minutes passed, then more. Time stretched out, slow and heavy, and with each passing moment, a familiar anxiety began to press against my ribs. I checked my phone, though there were no messages, no missed calls, no explanations, just silence. I told myself he might be running late, that he had obligations or unexpected delays. That being who he was meant unpredictability. But the longer I waited, the harder it became to quiet the gnawing sense that something was wrong. After nearly 40 minutes, my phone buzzed and my breath caught. But the notification wasn't from him. It was an email from my manager reminding me about next week's schedules. I put the phone down, trying not to feel ridiculous for the disappointment that punched through me. I waited another 10 minutes, then 20. Eventually I stood slowly, each limb feeling heavier than it should. Maybe today wasn't happening. Maybe yesterday's closeness scared him more than he let on. Maybe he needed space. Maybe I had imagined everything. I turned to leave, forcing myself not to look back at the bench as if doing so would make the disappointment worse. I took only a few steps before a voice called out behind me, breathless, urgent. My heart stopped. Wait. I froze, turning slowly. He was running toward me wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, hair messy like he'd rushed out the door without looking in a mirror. When he reached me, he bent forward slightly, hands on his knees, catching his breath. "I'm sorry," he said between breaths. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be late." Relief washed over me so intensely it made my knees weak. "It's okay," I murmured. "I was just worried." He finished for me, straightening to meet my eyes. "Yeah, I know. And I should have texted. There was just, something happened." He hesitated, glancing around the park like checking for threats. His breathing gradually steadied, but there was a sharpness behind his eyes I hadn't seen before, something unsettled. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, but it wasn't convincing. "I will be." He motioned to the bench. "Can we sit?" We did, and for a moment he didn't speak. His fingers fidgeted with the hem of his hoodie, twisting the fabric until the knuckles turned white. "This morning," he began, staring down, "I had people waiting outside my building." I stiffened. "Fans? Paparazzi?" He said the word with quiet bitterness. "3 of them. They were sitting in a car across the street with long lenses. They weren't there yesterday. Or the day before. They were waiting for me to come out." He exhaled sharply. "I don't know who tipped them off, but it's been a while since they got that close." My chest tightened. "Did they follow you here?" "No," he answered quickly. "I checked twice. I took a different route." "Cut through side streets?" "I'm careful." Silence crept in, not heavy, just tense. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I know what that does to you." His jaw tensed. "It's not them I'm worried about. It's you." I blinked. "Me?" "Yes," his voice softened. "If they find out I've been spending time with someone, anyone, they'll twist it into something it's not. They'll make it ugly. They'll drag you into it. They don't even know I exist," I said gently. "Not yet," he murmured. The implication lingered. Not yet, meaning they could. Meaning they might. Meaning this wasn't as invisible as we hoped. Before I could respond, he reached out, hesitating before letting his hand brush mine, the lightest touch. Barely there, but electric in its restraint. "I don't want you hurt because of me." "I won't be," I said, though a small part of me wasn't sure. "You don't know them?" he said, shaking his head. "They invent things. They snap a picture from a distance and write an entire fantasy to match it." He paused. "I just needed to warn you." I absorbed his words quietly, then asked, "Do you want to stop meeting?" His head shot up instantly. "No," the force of the words startled me. "Absolutely not." He ran a hand over his face. I need to figure out how to protect this." There it was, the word he kept dancing around but never saying outright. This, whatever this was. Whatever we were becoming. He turned toward me fully then, expression softer. "I don't want to lose you." Something in my chest unraveled at those words, something tight, something I didn't know I'd been holding. "You won't?" I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He looked away, as if emotional weight was something he couldn't hold eye contact through. "I haven't let anyone close in a long time," he said quietly. "Not really close. Even people I trust. There's always a layer, a boundary." He lifted his hand again, this time resting it lightly on my knee in a gesture so tentative it made my heart ache. "You're crossing it without even trying." For a long time, neither of us moved. The park gradually filled around us, dogs barking, children laughing, cyclists passing, but none of it felt like it belonged to our bubble. Eventually, he took a long breath, letting it out slowly. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. Why aren't you afraid of this?" "Of me? Of all the chaos that follows me everywhere?" I thought about that. Really thought about it. "Because you're not the chaos," I said. "It just comes attached to your name. The person you are when you take off the hat and the sunglasses. The person who brought me to the greenhouse. The person I've been talking to these past weeks. That person isn't chaos." My voice softened. "He's just human." He closed his eyes briefly, like my words hit him somewhere he didn't expect. When he opened them again, they were warmer, calmer. "You know how rare that is?" he asked. "For someone to see me as human?" "It shouldn't be rare," I replied. "But I'm glad I can be the one who does." He leaned back on the bench, eyes drifting up to the clouds. "I wish we met as normal people," he said quietly. "Just two strangers in a park. No cameras. No gossip. No fame? We kinda did," I said. "When we met, I didn't even realize you were—" He laughed softly. "You really didn't?" "Nope, that's still insane to me." "You said it was refreshing. It still is." He turned his head toward me, his expression unreadable but warm. "Can I tell you something I've been thinking about?" My heart quickened. "Yeah, I don't know what we're becoming," he said honestly. "But I know I don't want it to stop." His voice lowered, barely above a whisper. "And that scares the hell out of me." I swallowed hard, because it scared me too. Not the attention, not the risk, but the intensity of the connection. The closeness, the inevitability of it. "We'll figure it out," I said. "Together." That word, together, made his eyes soften in a way that felt like a quiet breakthrough. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he reached out slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away. I didn't. His hand found mine, fingers threading between my own, warm and steady. The contact was light, but it anchored something inside both of us. We sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, breaths sinking unconsciously, neither of us rushing the moment. This wasn't a confession. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't the beginning of something romantic or the end of something platonic. It was simply real, and that was enough. But as peaceful as the moment was, something else lingered beneath it, something unspoken but felt. A tension. A shift. A coming storm neither of us could name yet. When he finally stood, still holding my hand, he squeezed gently. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Tomorrow." He nodded, releasing my hand slowly, reluctantly, like letting go of something precious. As he walked away, he glanced back once, a small, fleeting glance that somehow meant everything. And in that fleeting moment, I felt it clearly for the first time. We were no longer orbiting something. We were falling into it, and neither of us knew how deep it would go. The next day, the world felt heavier than it had in weeks, as if the air itself sensed the shift happening beneath the surface of our lives. I woke before my alarm, staring at the faint cracks in my ceiling like they were some kind of map to a place I'd never been. My chest felt tight not with dread, but with the kind of nervous anticipation that comes right before something irreversible. For the first time since our story began, I felt the weight of what this had become. Not just a coincidence, not just conversations, not just an anonymous connection. Something real, something living. Something fragile enough to ruin us both and powerful enough to change everything. I got dressed slowly, choosing my clothes without thinking, my mind looping through every moment that had led us here. From the restaurant to the park bench to the greenhouse to the quiet confession that maybe, just maybe, we were becoming something neither of us expected. By the time I stepped outside, the sky was gray, the clouds thick and low like the world was bracing for rain. I walked toward the park with a strange sense of calm that didn't match the storm inside me. Whatever today became good or bad, I knew it mattered. I arrived early again, nerves tugging my footsteps faster than usual. The bench was empty. My heart dropped for only a moment before I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, he was already there, hood pulled low. Breathing hard like he'd rushed again, and like he wasn't sure how today would unfold. He stopped in front of me, searching my face with an intensity that felt almost fragile. "You came?" he said softly. "Of course." He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath since yesterday. "I wasn't sure," he admitted. "After what I told you, I wasn't sure if I scared you off." "You didn't?" I said. "You were honest? And I'd rather have honesty than distance." Something softened in him, a tension easing from his shoulders. "Good," he whispered, "because there's something I need to say, and I don't know how you're going to take it." He looked around, scanning the area with that same hyper-awareness he always carried, the one born from years of being watched. But then he turned back to me with something different in his eyes: resolve, vulnerability, fear. "Let's walk," he said. We moved along the winding path beside the pond, the water still and reflective like glass. Ducks glided silently across the surface, ripples trailing behind them. The world felt unnaturally quiet, like everything was waiting. Finally, he stopped near a cluster of tall trees where the path curved and the city noise faded. "I didn't sleep last night," he began, voice low. "I kept thinking about you, about us, about yesterday in the greenhouse." The memory hit us both at the same time, the closeness, the almost confession, the nearly crossed line. He continued, "I've spent so long keeping people at arm's length that I forgot what it feels like to let someone in. And now that I'm letting you in—" He hesitated, inhaling shakily. "It terrifies me." My stomach tightened. "I understand. Do you?" he asked, looking at me. "Do you know what it means if I let you become important? Really important?" I swallowed. "I think so. It means cameras, rumors, lies." His voice cracked. "It means people trying to make you into a villain or a gold digger or a scandal. It means you losing your privacy. It means you hurting from my consequences." My chest tightened. "I'm not afraid of that." "But I am," he said sharply, then softened. "I'm so afraid of being the reason your life gets ripped apart." I stepped closer without thinking. "You won't ruin my life." "You don't know that," he murmured. "But I know this," I said. "Being with you, whatever this is, it's the first time I've felt something real in a long time." He closed his eyes briefly, as if he wanted to let my words sink into the parts of him that never believed he deserved them. When he opened them again, he looked raw, human, scared. "I want you in my life," he said finally. "I want this. I want you." My breath hitched, but he wasn't done. "But I don't want to do it in hiding anymore." Silence dropped between us, heavy and electrifying. "What?" I whispered. "I'm tired," he said. "I'm tired of pretending I don't care about people I care about. Tired of letting fear control every step I take. Tired of thinking I have to live behind walls." He looked at me in a way that made everything inside me go still. "If you want this, if you want me, I don't want it halfway. I don't want secrets. I don't want shadows. I want something real." The world tilted. "Are you saying I'm choosing you?" he said simply. "If you choose me back, then we'll face whatever comes. Together." Everything inside me felt like it was unraveling and coming together all at once. I realized then that all the fear I carried wasn't about the cameras or the gossip or the weight of who he was. My fear was losing the version of him who sat with me on quiet mornings, who opened abandoned greenhouses, who whispered truths he'd never said aloud. My fear was losing him. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. "I choose you?" I whispered. His exhale was shaky, almost disbelieving. He stepped closer, so close I felt the warmth of him even without touching. Then there's something else I need to tell you, he said. His voice softened, deepened. That morning, the day in the restaurant, the day you served me and didn't make a big deal out of who I was, you changed something in me. His hand lifted slowly, hovering near my cheek but not touching. And the day you used that tip to see your mom, the day you got to be with her one last time, I don't think I've ever been more grateful for anything in my life. A tear slipped down my cheek. He caught it gently with his thumb. I didn't just help you get to your mother, he whispered. You helped me remember who I was before the world decided for me. My chest broke open. Not painfully, just completely. And then, for the first time, he closed the space between us. His lips met mine in the softest, most deliberate kiss I'd ever felt, not rushed, not desperate, just full of quiet certainty. A kiss that said I'm here. A kiss that felt like a beginning and an ending wrapped into one. When he pulled away, he rested his forehead against mine. You don't have to be afraid, he murmured. Not of me. The world felt impossibly still. What now? I whispered. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. Now? He took my hand, threading his fingers through mine with gentle finality. Now we stop hiding. A breeze swept through the trees above us, scattering a few pale leaves across the path. He squeezed my hand once, then looked into my eyes with a certainty I had never seen in him before, a confidence that came not from fame or success, but from choosing something real for the first time in years. Whatever comes, he said softly, we'll face it together. And for the first time since my mother died, since grief hollowed out the deepest parts of me, I felt something warm grow inside my chest. Hope. Not fragile, not temporary, not borrowed, a new beginning, one neither of us ever expected, but one we both chose, together.